World Extreme Cage Fighting, which used to be home to the best lower weight MMA fighters in the world, gave the featherweight division to the UFC in 2011. Since then, the 145-pound weight class has been one of the most interesting in the UFC as a whole. At first, the division had a clear winner who seemed unbeatable. Then, the division was taken over by a fighter who might have been the most charismatic of all time. From there, deadly strikers have taken over the division, and once again, a dominant champion is sitting on top of the division. In the last 10 years, many of the best fighters in the UFC, based on their weight, have been in the featherweight division. But over the past 10 years, 10 fighters have stood out from the rest. Chang Sung-jung, also known as the Korean Zombie, has been a threat in the weight class since the UFC's first fight in the division. Jung may have had the best debut in the history of the UFC. Jung won his first UFC match with a twister submission hold in March 2011. With his submission of the year win, Jung showed UFC fans right away that he was someone to keep an eye on. Since then, Jung has won fights against Frankie Edgar and Dustin Poirier, two of the toughest fighters in the UFC history. Jung beat Dan Eigel by a decision. So, Jung is set to fight for the UFC Featherweight Championship at UFC 273 on April 9th. Since 2014, Yair Rodriguez has gone from a promising UFC fighter to one of the top contenders in the featherweight division. Rodriguez started his time in the UFC with 6 wins in a row. The best part of this win streak was how well he did against former UFC champion BJ Penn. In his last 5 fights, he has gone 2-2, with one fight ending in a draw. Chan Sung-jung and Jeremy Stephens are 2 big names that Rodriguez has beaten. Rodriguez has won a Performance of the Night, or Fight of the Night award in 7 of his 11 UFC fights. When the UFC added featherweights for the first time, Chad Mendes was one of the most promising fighters in the division. Mendes won his first 11 fights when he first started out, and the last 2 of those were in the UFC. The winning streak got him a title fight against Jose Aldo, who was the champion at the time. Mendes looked good in the first round of his title fight at UFC 142 in 2012, but he was knocked out in the last second of the fight. Mendes didn't let this loss stop him from getting ahead in his career. He then won 5 straight fights inside the octagon to get another title fight, but Mendes couldn't beat Aldo when they fought again. After this loss, Mendes lost 3 of his next 5 fights and quit the sport. Frankie Edgar, who used to be the UFC lightweight champion, also did well in the featherweight division. Edgar lost the lightweight title in 2012, so he dropped his weight to 145 and went for the featherweight title right away. Edgar went on to win 8 of his 13 fights in the division, even though he lost a decision to Jose Aldo. He beat Cub Swanson, Chad Mendes, BJ Penn, Charles Oliveira, Uriah Faber, and Yair Rodriguez when he was a featherweight. Brian Ortega is now one of the UFC's most dangerous fighters. 7 out of his 8 UFC wins have been by knockout or submission. Ortega has won big fights against great fighters like Frankie Edgar, Clay Guida, Cub Swanson, and Chan Sung-jung. Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski, who is the current UFC featherweight champion, are the only people he has lost to for the title. Ortega lost both of his fights, but both of them were named Fight of the Night. Even though Uriah Faber's career as a featherweight took place outside of the UFC, he was a big reason why the division was added to the UFC. Before 2011, the UFC didn't have lighter weight classes like featherweight and bantamweight because it was thought that lighter fighters didn't draw as many fans. But when he was the WEC featherweight champion, Faber showed that wasn't true. The only pay-per-view event in WEC history happened because of Faber's popularity and Jose Aldo's dominance as a champion. In 2010, Faber lost a decision and moved up to the bantamweight division. Faber would later fight in the UFC as a featherweight, but he lost to Frankie Edgar by decision. The notorious Conor McGregor, who may be the most charismatic fighter to ever step into the octagon, began his UFC career in the featherweight division.
These featherweights don't understand. Until they get hit by me, it's a whole other ball game when they get hit by me. So I said I'd knock him out in the first round.
When McGregor joined the UFC for the first time in 2013, he took the featherweight division by storm.
Work hard, put in the time, you will succeed. And that is a philosophy that I carry, my coaches carry. And
McGregor beat big names like Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway on his way to getting a chance to fight for the title. At UFC 189 in 2015, McGregor beat Chad Mendes by technical knockout to win an interim featherweight title for the UFC. Later that year, McGregor shocked the world when he knocked out Jose Aldo in just 13 seconds to win the UFC Featherweight Championship. After McGregor won the featherweight title, he quit the division, gave up the title, and hasn't fought at 145 pounds since.
I mean, the man is running scared. I cannot force a man who is not willing to step in.
Max Holloway has always been a threat in the UFC featherweight division. Since 2012, he has fought 18 times in the octagon at 145 pounds and has won before. After losing to Conor McGregor in 2013, Holloway won 9 straight fights to get a chance to fight for the title. Holloway won an interim featherweight title in 2016 by getting a technical knockout win over the former UFC lightweight champion Anthony Pettis. Holloway went on to knock out Jose Aldo and win the UFC Featherweight Championship. He defended his title 3 times by beating Aldo in a rematch, Brian Ortega, and Frankie Edgar. The current champion of the UFC's featherweight division is Alexander Volkanovski. It's possible that he has what it takes to become the greatest featherweight fighter in the annals of the sport. Volkanovski's record in the UFC is perfect, and he has won all 10 of his matches there.
He didn't respect my wrestling grappling. And I guess maybe I didn't respect his striking enough either, because he landed some shots. So fair play to both of us.
His overall record in mixed martial arts competition is 23-1, and he's won his last 20 bouts. Volkanovski defeated Darren Elkins, Chad Mendes, and Jose Aldo, a former UFC featherweight champion, on his way to winning the title of Ultimate Fighting Championship UFC champion. After defeating Max Holloway at UFC 245, which took place in 2019, Volkanovski became the new champion.
I want to get back in. I said I was going to stay active. Just because I pulled up short tonight, that doesn't change a thing. I'm a man of my word.
Since then, he has successfully defended his title against Holloway, and most recently in September, he prevailed over Brian Ortega via unanimous decision. At UFC 273, which takes place on April 9th, Volkanovski is scheduled to defend his title against Chan Sung Jung, also known as the Korean Zombie.
Great fighter. Maybe we'll settle pound for pound #1 again.
Jose Aldo's record as UFC featherweight champion makes it hard to say that. He is not the best featherweight fighter of all time. In 2009, Aldo became the WEC featherweight champion before the UFC took over the division and made Aldo the first UFC champion at 145 pounds. He defended the title twice. As UFC champion, Aldo has defended his title 7 times in a row, which is a record for the division. Chad Mendes, Chad Sung Jung, and Frankie Edgar were the people he defended his title against who were the most important. Since McGregor never defended the title, Aldo won an interim title that was later made the undisputed title. Aldo later lost the title to Max Holloway, and since then, he has moved to the bantamweight division and won his last 3 fights.